everyone, my name is Jocelyn Quirarte, and today I will be analyzing for my content analysis the show Euphoria, which is an analysis plan of drug and alcohol depictions. So, first, for my introduction, the TV show I will analyze is Euphoria, and the topic I've chosen to focus on is drug and alcohol use. I will be coding 2 episodes of the series for this content. And Euphoria is not a television show created by is a show created to follow a group of high school students as they navigate complex issues such as addiction, identity, relationships, and trauma. The show does center around our main character, which is Rue Bennett, a teenage girl that does struggle with substance abuse and mental health challenges that is portrayed throughout the show. I did choose the show because, as I mentioned, it does portray a lot of substance use in a raw and graphic way that has sparked a lot of significant cultural conversations and controversial conversations for teens and young adults, and whether this is really a show that we want them watching. So, for my previous research shows that adolescents are very impressionable when it comes to media, especially during their identity development years. According to Strasberg, adolescents often learn social behaviors by observing media characters. Coyne and Padilla Walker point out that substance use is often glamorized in shows like Euphoria, and from our book as well, where Tella explains how repeated exposure can actually increase the likelihood of experimentation in real life. So while the show might show some consequences, the emotional or artistic framing can make it hard to tell whether it's a warning or if it's being glamorized. Now, for my current study and research questions, I did analyze again, 2 episodes from the show. And, for my purpose of this study is to examine how often, alcohol and drug use is portrayed in the series Euphoria. As I mentioned, I am coding 2 episodes, and this study is to identify the frequency and context of substance use scenes and how it's contributing to the growing body of research on media influences and adolescent development. While there's already much existing research exploring how media affects teen behavior, there is a gap in detailed content analyses of shows like Euphoria, which is known for its intense and realistic portrayals of teen drug use. And the research question, the first one I have, is how many times per episode does Euphoria portray drug and alcohol content? My second research question is how often is the drug and alcohol content visual and how often is it verbal? My third research question is what types of drugs or alcohol are most commonly portrayed in Euphoria? My fourth research question is what is the emotional or situational context in which drug/alcohol content appears? For my hypotheses, I did have 4, and each of them kind of goes throughout the show of what's being depicted for drug and alcohol. So for my first hypothesis, I have each episode of Euphoria contains multiple instances of drug/alcohol content. My second hypothesis says visual portrayals of drug/alcohol content will occur more frequently than verbal references. My third hypothesis is the most common type of drugs and alcohol shown most are, I assume, marijuana, opiates, and stimulants. My fourth and final hypothesis is the drug and alcohol use most often occurs in parties and, social gatherings, and they're also used as well in emotional coping situation. Now, here's how I define and categorize what I was coding. I looked at the type of substance used, whether the scene was visual or verbal, like the context, such as the party, or them emotionally coping, and whether there were consequences shown, such as either positive, neutral, or negative. As well, for my general definition, I did say that drug and alcohol content includes any references to or depiction of the use, possession, or distribution of drugs or alcoholic beverages. This includes illegal drugs such as cocaine, ecstasy, prescription drugs, marijuana, etc., and any form of alcohol such as beer, wine, other forms of liquor, etc. Both multiple direct and indirect uses are used and references are also included. So as you can see, this is my first coding sheet, and I did analyze, the very first episode of the show. These are the examples in episode 1. For example, Rue uses opiates, and another character, Jules, is seen using MDMA in a party setting. And as you can also see here, there's other instances of like our other characters, such as Nate and Maddie, who partake are in alcohol use, and it is, used in social gatherings. And from what I did notice from this coding sheet is a majority of it is visual. A majority, all of them are teens. A majority of these characters are female. And as you can see, a lot of these also, the context of use is that they're at a party. So those are like some of the four things I didn't notice about this coding sheet in the first episode. For my second coding sheet, I did analyze the seventh episode in season 1. And again, same thing. There is, two instances of Rue, our main character, who's partaking in, drug use such as opiates and marijuana, and she's using it not only because she has an addiction, but because she's trying to cope with her emotions. And we do have another character by the name of Cassie. She doesn't use any drugs, but she does drink alcohol. She's a teen, she's female, and as long with the consequences, a lot of these are neutral. However, the first one is, Rue's punished because she does go through an emotional and mental decline. Other than that, we do have our also only adult character from these two coding sheets. This is going to be Nate's dad, and same thing, he is just drinking alcohol with a neutral consequence, and he's just drinking alone at home. So with the results of, both coding sheets, I do believe my first hypothesis was supported because both episodes had I only did code four instances of drug and alcohol use for each coding sheet. However, as I mentioned, there are many, many instances of drug and alcohol being used in the show. For example, in the first 20 minutes, there are probably more than I would say 15 instances of drug and alcohol being used. So again, to go back to that, my first hypothesis was supported because both episodes had many instances involving substance use. My second hypothesis was also supported because out of the 8 total scenes, coding instances, 7 were visual and only 1 was verbal. That matches the show's intense that matches the show's intense and cinematic style where most things are shown rather than, being said. For my third hypothesis, this was supported as well because most substances shown on the show were marijuana, opiates, stimulants like cocaine and MDMA. And also to include that with my fourth hypothesis, I would say it was partly supported because about half the scenes did take place at a party, but the other half did happen more in an emotional or private setting. So while partying is, a major context for drinking or doing drugs, another, people did another, other instances did include the characters just being at home, for emotional coping. So I would say this was about 50-50 supported and not supported. Finally, for my discussions and implications of my content analysis, I would say that for my discussion, there are definitely a lot of mixed messages that teens might pick up on in the show. Drug and alcohol use is, really shown as exciting yet destructive. It looks like teens are having fun, they're drinking, doing drugs, but the aftermath just show the harsh realities like withdrawals and isolation. A lot of parts of the show do glamorize the risky behavior, while others do show the emotional damage it can cause. In a lot of ways, too, the female characters are very sexualized and might send the message that their value is tied to how they look. And many of the relationships in the show power imbalances in traditional gender roles, which can reinforce any outdated ideas that teens may already have. Unfortunately, since teens are still figuring out who they are, they often do already turn to social media like this to get a sense of what's normal or what route they kind of want to take socially. So these conflicting messages can be confusing. Some might try to copy what looks cool, while others may know not to, connect with those struggles and kind of take their own way to learn who they are themselves without kind of, in a way, participating in what they think is cool. Or, for example, if somebody's peer pressured as well, they know to just, stay back. And as well, because the adolescent brain is still developing, especially when it comes to impulse control and decision making, it can be really hard to fully separate fiction from, real life for teenagers. A lot of times I was actually surprised that the show didn't just glamorize everything. There was, a pretty even balance between the party scenes and their emotional fallout. So in a way, the show did kind of very much show the consequence of partaking in alcohol or drug use. And again, the show also did rely heavily on visuals rather than just dialogue, which does show how powerful imagery can be in shaping what viewers take away from it. Some implications that I would give parents are to be aware that adolescents may model behavior seen in media, especially when the characters are rewarded or admired. There can be many mixed messaging which makes it important to talk through media content with teens, not to just restrict it, but to very much talk to the teens throughout the whole process. Some recommendations I would give to parents as well is to teach teens to question and analyze what they watch. And the same goes for counselors and educators. I would say they should create a safe space to discuss emotions and social pressure shown in media. And they could also use examples from shows like Euphoria to explore real life issues in a guided yet critical way. Finally, I would advocate for platforms to include content warnings or debrief resources with intense media. Because I do believe it is one thing to just tell your teen or to tell teens, like, don't do drugs or don't drink alcohol. However, I do think, unfortunately, a lot of kids, times, especially teens, they don't tend to listen, which is, not abnormal. So I do believe, very much talking, having very serious discussions with them about this. And this goes for all parents, counselors, teachers, anybody, any adult, taking care or involved with teens' lives, that they really just take the time to discuss what could happen, what the consequences are, and that at the end of the day, it is their own decision. And those teens, unfortunately, are their own person. They decide what route they want to take, and hopefully it is a right route where they know not to partake in drug and alcohol use, which could, very much have a negative impact on their body and on their mental health. And thank you so much. This was my content analysis project for Euphoria, which I did, code and do a very much debriefing on content analysis and, analyzing the drug and alcohol use of the show Euphoria. Thank you so much.